Chapter 17. Out of the Ashes. Holly was just coming off the beach when the cab driver complaining about the beach road pulled up in front of Kenneth's house. I paid him and he drove off, swearing that if he had known I wanted him to take me here, he would have never accepted the assignment. Holly waved and hurried along, breaking into a fast walk. Ulysses barking and rushing past her to greet me. "What's up? Why are you back?" "I have to show Kenneth something that came in special delivery to me," I replied. "What is it?" She followed as I walked toward the studio, explaining what it was. She looked at the pictures, even though she had never known Mama, and she'd never seen any photographs of her. "They say everyone has a twin someplace," Holly offered, handing the catalog back. Kenneth was seated on his small sofa, staring at the sculpture when we entered the studio. He looked up so casually, I realized he hadn't even known I'd left earlier. "Lunchtime, huh?" he said. "No, Kenneth, I brought you a sandwich. I brought you that sandwich you have been wasting away on the table there," Holly said, nodding toward the plate on the tray. He gazed at it. "Oh, you brought it to me? What about Melanie?" "I've been home and back, Kenneth," I said. "There didn't seem to be much for me to do here, and I had to pack to move in with Grandma Olivia, remember?" Right, he said. "So I forgot to eat lunch, huh?" He reached over and grasped the sandwich. "Looks good." "What is it?" "Holly, sprouts, tomatoes, herbs?" "Just eat it, Kenneth," she said. He took a bite, smiled, and chewed. Then he took his first real look at me. "What's happening? If you went home to pack, why are you here?" He looked at Holly for some hint. "She's got something to show you, Ken." "Oh?" I handed him the catalog and opened it to the page Alice had folded. He gazed at it a moment and put the sandwich down and sat up. Then he looked at me, his eyebrows dipping toward each other. "What is this?" He turned the catalog to the front. "In Vogue?" "My girlfriend in Sewell sent it to me. Her mother orders clothes from that company. She just happened to be browsing through the latest copy and saw those pictures of that model who resembles Mommy." "Latest copy?" He narrowed his eyes suspiciously on the fine print on the inside cover. "Doesn't it look like her, Ken?" Holly asked. "It's a remarkable resemblance," he muttered. He got up and went to his tool table, shifting some things around to find his magnifying glass. Then he thumbed through the pictures. He stared ahead for a moment and shook his head gently before looking again. "I thought if anyone knew my mother's face and could decide about these pictures, it was you," I said. He nodded. I held my breath, waiting. "It might be something she did before the accident," he offered. "But it's Haley, no doubt about it," he concluded. A surge of heat moved through my neck and brought a crimson flush to my cheeks. I used to wonder what it was like for families and loved ones of actors and actresses to turn on the television set and see them on the screen. I imagined it had been a wonderful and painful at the same time. "But if it's Mommy, why is her hair black?" I asked. "Even her eyebrows." "It just might have been what the company or photographer wanted for his shoot," Holly suggested. Kenneth looked at the pages again. "I don't see why. Actually, Holly's real color would have worked just as well with these shots and the color of these clothes." "Maybe she had just done something else, Kenneth." "There's a dozen reasons for it, I imagine," Holly said. He nodded. "I'm sure," he said. He stared at the magazine as if he couldn't let go of it and couldn't stop looking at the picture. He flipped to the front again, reread the fine print. "Charlie Dunn could probably find out more about this," he said. He looked up at me. "Charlie's a friend of mine in Boston who's big in advertising." "What do you expect him to find out, Ken?" Holly asked. I caught the way she moved her eyes towards me to suggest he was doing something wrong, but Kenneth was intrigued on his own and not just for me. I could see it in his face and in the way his eyes continued to look at the pictures. "Just to settle our minds about it," he replied softly. "When the pictures were done, Was this Haley? I thought you said it was, Holly said. Nothing's for sure, but it sure looks like her to me. Especially that turn in her lips, the way her cheekbones stand out, the way she's holding her head just a little to the right. He went quickly to the drawer and in the table and rifled through some papers before coming up with a photograph. He placed it beside the pictures on the catalog. I drew closer. The picture he took out of the drawer was a picture Mommy had taken on Judge Child's dock. The face in this picture is about the same size, he muttered. He began to make some measurements with a thin ruler and then nodded again. Apparently he knew Mommy's face so well he remembered the inches between her nose and mouth and across her forehead. If it's not her, there was a twin I never knew about, he concluded. When are you going to call this friend of yours in Boston? I asked softly. He thought for a moment, looked at his sculpture, then shrugged. How about right now? It's time for a break, he said. Let's go down to the Mermaid and have a brew while I call Charlie. You can have a root beer, he told me and smiled. What? You're actually going to make me set foot out of this studio during my lifetime, Holly kidded. Is this still your lifetime, I thought? Were we already living in another spiritual existence, he replied. He went to change his shirt and wash his hands and face before we drove to town in his Jeep. I found myself holding my breath every time my thoughts went to the catalog and the things Kenneth had said. Mommy had never written to tell me she'd modeled for this catalog, nor had she mentioned the few times that we had spoken on the telephone. Wouldn't she have been proud of it? Perhaps it was, as Holly thought, someone who just happened to have a close resemblance. The Mermaid was a small pub on the side street. I had never actually been inside, although I knew Kenneth went there whenever he spent time in town. There was a short bar on the right with the thick cherrywood tables and captain chairs on the left. Everything looked worn and weathered. There were whale bones on the walls and pictures of fishermen and sailors. There was only a half a dozen customers, all who knew Kenneth and gave him a warm, loud greeting. The man with curly brown hair behind the counter offered to give me a cold root beer. Our root beer has a bite to it, you know. Just give it to her with none of your jokes, Clancy, Kenneth said, and he winked at us. Holly and I sat at the table in the corner as Kenneth went to the rear to the payphone. All the drinks had been delivered to our table when he returned. Charlie's doing research for us and promises to get back within the hour. He knows this company well, Kenneth said. He spread the catalog before him and stared down at the pictures. Tell me about the man your mother ran off with, he asked. Kenneth sipped his beer and listened, his eyes taking a deep, dark glint as I spoke. Hallie was gullible, trusting, and eager to believe in fairy tales, he said, especially if the teller of the tale made her the princess. So, he said, sitting back, Olivia told Sarah and Jacob what she wanted you to do? Yes, I described what it had been like when I returned to the house. Uncle Jacob practically salivated at the prospect. I added, and Kenneth laughed. It sounds as if you'll be better off at your grandmother's, Melanie, Holly said. She's not really my grandmother. My real grandmother is shut up in that home. I'm sure it won't be easy living with Grandma Olivia, no matter what she promises, I added. Kenneth and Holly exchanged looks, but Kenneth said nothing. I had no reason to blame him, I thought. A teenage girl is quite a responsibility to take on at this point in his life. He was a free soul. Right now, he had an artistic impulse to drive off and stray away for others for days. He couldn't if he had me to watch over. A little over a half hour later, we heard the phone ring and the bartender call Kenneth. "It's for you," he said. As Kenneth got up and went to the tavern, my heart started thumping. Holly smiled at me and put her hand over mine. "I'm sure it's all going to be easily explainable," she said. I nodded, but my heart felt as if it was double in size and would soon hammer itself through my chest. We watched Kenneth as he listened. He nodded, turned his back, and spoke softly, then cradled the receiver and just stood there without turning around. When he started to us, I knew it wasn't going to be easily explainable. "That layout was done a little more than 2 months ago," he said. "The model on the page is someone called Gina Simon." "When did your mother pass away?" Holly asked. "It's been a little more than 2 months. About the same time," Kenneth said. "So that could be her in the catalog," Holly said. "But if it is my mother, why'd she change her name?" I asked. "Someone might have suggested it, told her that it sounded more professional," Holly suggested. "Right, Ken?" she asked. He didn't respond, and when I looked at him, his face was pale and his eyes troubled. "What is it, Kenneth?" I demanded. "Charlie said the guy he spoke with in LA told him that Gina Simon was currently doing another shoot. She got a job because of this catalog." "Oh," Holly said. My heart seemed to have stopped beating. It was as if all the world and all the time had been frozen. "What else did he say, Kenneth?" I asked. "He said her manager." "What?" Holly asked quickly. "Was someone named Richard Marlin." I shuddered as if a wave had crashed against the tavern. Someone laughed loudly. "What does it all mean, Ken?" "I don't know. Haley supposedly died in a car fire. The remains were sent back here for a funeral and burial. The police had identification, right, Melanie?" I nodded. "Amnesia," Holly suggested. "I don't know. That woman in this catalog is my mother, living under a different name," I said, because I had to hear the words spoken. "Ken?" "I don't know what to tell you, Holly." "Well, Melanie can't just be left here with that," Holly said. "I'll make some more calls and find out where this Gina Simons lives, and I'll go there," I said quickly. They both stared at me. "Go to LA?" Holly asked, sitting back. "Yes, I have to go. Don't you see? Don't you understand, don't you, Kenneth?" He ran his hand through his hair. "Why would she do this? Even after her death, she does overwhelming things. I'm right in the middle of this work. I'm not asking you to go with me, Kenneth." He stared at me. "I couldn't go anyway," he said. "I couldn't get myself to go chasing after her, not anymore." "You're not just going to let her go on an airplane to Los Angeles, Kenneth Childs, are you?" Holly said. "No, it's not my decision anyway. You better talk to Olivia first, Melanie," he said. It was as if I swallowed a rock. "Don't look at me like that. I can't be the one who sends you off to go find your mother. I'm not 100%. It's your mother." "It's like 99%, Holly quipped. "I can't just forget about it, Kenneth. I won't," I insisted. "I don't care what you or Grandma Olivia say," I shouted, tears burning under my eyelids. "Don't get yourself upset, sweetheart," Holly said, putting her arms on my shoulders. "We'll figure out what to do, won't we, Kenneth?" she asked sharply. Kenneth nodded. We were all silent a long moment, then Holly sighed. "I'll call my sister and tell her to meet you in Los Angeles if you go. She'll do me a favor and look after you." "I'd go, but I have to get back to the store." "You have a sister in Los Angeles?" "Dorothy Littlefield is her married name. She and I get along as well as oil and water, but she's well off. Lives in Beverly Hills and drives a Mercedes. Shops on Rodeo Drive and eats really fancy cuisines. but probably knows a lot about models and fashions. Her husband's an accountant. She's an Aries, born March 22nd. As an Aries, Holly recited, she has a quick temper and is inclined to hold a grudge, which she has against me for about 20 years. Is aggressive, self-willed, and determined, but she's very intelligent and always has been an A-plus student with a little effort. She's a really good businesswoman. They have no children, Holly added. Thank God, but I know that she would do this. She likes to be needed. Debbie Novell is out there too, Kenneth said. I think she just got divorced, didn't she? That was 5 years ago, Kenneth. Debbie Novell's is a ditz anyway. I wouldn't trust my cat with her. Remember when she left the car running all night in front of the dorm? What am I talking about? That's not the worst of it. She left her 4-year-old at the pharmacy and didn't realize it until they called her and told her hours later. Yeah, Kenneth said, smiling. I remember now. But I thought she was a big deal in California. Real estate? So? Kenneth shook his head. Then he turned to me and nodded softly. Okay, I'll make a call and find out what I can do with this so-called Gina Simon. What do you want to do now? He asked. Go see Grandma Olivia, I said. I'm going to ask her for the money that I'll need to make the trip. Olivia, you expect her to fork over the money? Kenneth asked. He was about to smile. When she finds out what it's for, I think she might double the amount, I muttered. Kenneth thought about it and then laughed. I think Melanie's capable of taking care of herself, Holly, he said. Holly raised her eyebrows. I'll take her to Grandma Olivia's, Ken. In fact, she said, turning to me, I'll take you to New York and get you on the plane if you'd like. Would you? It's the least I can do. We'll leave tonight, she added. I could, I said, thinking about it. I'm ready, packed. Loretta nearly smiled when she opened the door this time. I wondered if she meant that she'd accepted the fact that I was going to live in this house. I had your suitcases taken to your room, she said. And then she saw Holly standing just behind me and her eyes widened. Holly was wearing one of her tie-dyed dresses, a pink and yellow headband, and a John Lennon sunglasses. Her lipstick was tangerine. Where's Grandma Olivia and Grandpa Samuel? I asked. Mrs. Logan's in the garden and Mr. Logan is reading the papers out back, Loretta said, unable to take her eyes from Holly. Would you like me to show you to your room? I have to speak to my grandmother first, I said. We'll just go around to the garden, Loretta, thank you. The sight of Grandma Olivia down on her knees with the gardening fork in her hand and the wide-brimmed hat on her head took Holly by surprise. She doesn't look so tough, she muttered. She looks just like anyone's grandmother. You haven't met her yet, I replied dryly. Grandpa Samuel saw us from the lounge chair before Grandma Olivia did. He put down his papers and waved, standing as he did so. Well, hello there, my dear. Welcome, he called. Hello, Grandpa Samuel. This is my friend Holly Brooks. Actually, she's Kenneth's friend, and now mine, I added. He widened his smile and nodded. Pleased to meet you, Holly. Any friend of Kenneth is a friend of mine, and goes double for any friend of my granddaughter here. Visiting the Cape? I was, Holly said. I'm leaving tonight. Oh, that's too bad. I was looking forward to getting to know you, Grandpa Samuel said. Somehow I expect you'll live through the disappointment, Samuel, Grandma Olivia said. She had risen and stood, wiping her hands on her apron. Your things are up in your room, she added. I know, Loretta told me. This is Holly. I heard all that, she snapped. This isn't exactly the best time to be entertaining people. I would advise you to first settle yourself in, learn our schedule, including when it's proper and not to improper invite guests. I'm not staying long, Grandma, I said quickly. What's that? Grandpa Samuel said, turning to her. I thought, what does that mean? You're moving with Kenneth Child, she asked. No, I'd like to show you something and then explain, I said. She glared at me and then walked around the border of the garden toward the lounge chairs and table. She peeled off her garden gloves and poured herself some iced tea and watched as I approached, the catalog in hand. A friend of mine from West Virginia mailed this to me, I said, holding it out to her. Grandma Olivia gazed at it as if her hand had something dirty or smelly. What would I want with that, she asked. Just look at the woman modeling on this page, I requested. She put her glass down and slowly reached into her apron and came up with a pair of glasses. Grandpa Samuel moved to her side and gazed over her shoulder. They stared at the catalog and they both looked at us, unsure as to what it meant. That's Hallie, right? What happened to her hair? Grandpa Samuel asked. She obviously dyed it black, Grandma Olivia said and handed the catalog back to me. Are you here to tell me that proves that this is your mother and some sort of success? No, Grandma. Kenneth phoned a friend, and it turns out the woman in those pictures is still alive, living under the name Gina Simon. Gina Simon, Grandpa Samuel said. Let me see that again, he said. I handed him the catalog. Looks like Haley to me. To all of us, I said. That's why I'm leaving. I'm going to Los Angeles to find out if it's Mommy. Going to Los Angeles, but I don't understand, Grandpa Samuel said, once again turning to Grandma Olivia for guidance. She sat on the bench and looked from Holly to me. Are you taking her? She asked Holly. I offered to take her to New York, and she can catch a flight to Los Angeles from there. I have a sister who lives in LA, and I'll call her to ask her to meet Melanie and look after her, she replied. It's a good time for her to take a trip. Pardon? Her astrological chart, Holly replied, indicates that. What nonsense. Astrological chart? Rushing clear across the country? You can't go to Los Angeles. I absolutely forbid it, Grandma said. No, you don't, Grandma, I smiled. This woman could be my mother. If she is, I have someone to live with and somewhere else to live. I said, but how do you know that this is Haley? And we don't for sure, but it looks as if it might be, Holly replied. The man with whom Haley left for LA is that model's manager. Kenneth found out for us. Grandma smirked. Amazing, Grandpa Samuel said. But if that's Haley and she's still alive, who did we bury in our family plot? What difference does it make? Grandma Olivia snapped at him. She sat thinking for a moment and looked up at us. Such a trip costs a lot of money. Where do you get it? She asked. From you, I said calmly. Call it in advance on my inheritance. Grandpa Samuel laughed and shook his head until Grandma Olivia shot him a withering look. Who else knows about this idiotic idea? Just Kenneth and my friend in Sewell, I said. How's this family appeared in public was her only real concern. Unless, of course, I have to go begging for the money. I could go see my grandfather, I suppose, I added. She pulled her shoulders back and turned her eyes to stone. How dare you try to blackmail me? I'm not, but I'm gonna go, and I'm going tonight, I said firmly. She ripped the catalog from Grandpa Samuel's hand and gazed at the photograph again, shaking her head. This is insane, she mumbled. Very well. She rose. Come with me, she ordered. Don't we know someone who can look into this for us, Olivia? Grandpa Samuel asked, rather than send the girl, I mean. You think I want more people to know about this? She spit back at him. Well, I just thought. Don't think, she ordered. It's a waste of time. Come along, she told Holly and me, and we followed her in the house. She took us to the office and went behind a large, dark oak desk. Holly's presence gave me more courage, and I proved not to feel a little bit intimidated until she raised her head and focused those eyes on me. You will sign this, she said, scribbling on a plain sheet of paper. I gazed at Holly, who looked at me amazed. Grandma Olivia turned the paper to me and handed me the pen. The paper described my taking $2,000 as an advance in my inheritance. It was dated and signed by her. I signed it quickly and she folded it and put it in a wall safe from which he drew out money. "Count it," she ordered. I did so. It was $2,000 in $50 bills. I had never seen so much money at once, much less held it in my hands. She gave me an envelope. "If you lose that, don't come running back here for more. Make your way on your wits," she commanded. She sat again, folding her hands, leaning forward. "I expect to hear from you as soon as you confirm something and some decision has been made on your future, especially if you're coming back here." I nodded. "Thank you," I said. She leaned back. "Did it ever occur to you that even if that is your mother, she might not be worth finding? If she wanted you to know she was alive, she would have called you to tell you, wouldn't she?" "I don't know," I said. "That's why I want to go." She smirked and then looked at me with an expression that bordered on concern and friendliness. "I'll give you this advance. If someone's drowning and you can't save her, you'll only drown yourself as well if you don't let go," she said. No one was more of an expert when it came to saving herself, I thought, but I didn't say it. I held my gaze at her for an instant and then turned to leave. "May I ask you when you were born, the month, day, and year?" Holly asked Grandma Olivia. "You may not. That's impertinent." "You were born between November 22nd and December 21st, Holly replied, undaunted. Grandma Olivia's eyes widened and she looked at me. She must have thought I'd given Holly the correct information. "I don't know why I care, but what is that supposed to mean if it's so?" "That you're a Sagittarius," Holly replied. "Whatever that may mean to you, it means nothing to me," Grandma Olivia said. Holly smiled as if she thought that was exactly what a Sagittarius like Grandma Olivia would say. Grandma Olivia then saw to it that my 2 small suitcases were brought back down. "I had then placed in what was your mother's room," she told me at the door. "Somehow I think you'll be back." Holly and I put my bags in her car and drove away. "You were right," she said after a few minutes of deep silence. "She's definitely not like everyone's old grandmother." I started to smile, then thought about Carrie. "I have one more goodbye before we leave, Holly," I said. "I know, I'll drop you off at the house and get my things, and then we'll be off." I sucked my breath and closed my eyes and prayed for the right words to help Carrie understand the things that I didn't understand myself. Aunt Sarah and May were surprised but happy to see my return. They were preparing dinner. Uncle Jacob had apparently gone back upstairs to his room, and Carrie had not come back from the sea yet. "I had a very difficult time of it," Aunt Sarah said in a loud whisper, her eyes shifting from the ceiling. "It took nearly 15 minutes to get him up the stairs. He had to keep trying to catch his breath. He's upset about it." "Do you have a nice room at Olivia's?" she asked with a sad smile. "She's giving me my mother's old room," I said. "Oh, that's very nice. I remember that room. It's airy and the windows face the sea. But first, I have to take a trip, Aunt Sarah." "A trip where?" I told her, but instead of surprising and exciting her, the news made her sad and withdrawn. She lowered her eyes and went back to work. "I'll come to see you as soon as I return," I promised, and gave her a kiss on the cheek. I don't understand the things some people do. It seems like they just want to make other people who love them unhappy. Like Laura going out to sea that day. "Carrie said he warned her," she mumbled, her eyes on the potatoes that she was mashing. "Why did she have to go?" She wiped her eyes and turned to me. "You don't have to go, do you, Melanie?" "Yes, Aunt Sarah, I have to go or I'll never be able to sleep one single night," I said. She nodded and wiped away her tears, smiled and stroked my hair before returning to her work. That was how I felt. Outside, I sat on the bench and explained my trip to May. She promised that she would look after her dad and Carrie, and we embraced and kissed. And she ran back in the house so I wouldn't see her cry. I sat for a little while just enjoying the breeze on my face. I hadn't lived here that long, but my experiences went so deep, it seemed like I lived most of my life on the ocean. The cry of the terns was familiar now, and the colors and the water didn't surprise me as much. My heart was no longer an outsider. I welcomed the salty sea air and the roar of the surf, the sand between my toes. Maybe Carrie was right. Maybe this really was my home. Maybe Grandma Olivia's confidence about my returning came from her intuitive knowledge about me and what was true for me. I rose and walked down to the beach, looking toward the dock. I saw the lobster boat had arrived. I hurried over the sand and waved as soon as I drew close enough for Carrie to see me. He waved back and watched me approach, his hands on his hip, and I knew his sharp sea eyes were fixed on my every move. He came off the boat quickly when I reached the dock. "What's happening now?" he said with a tight smile and penetrating eyes. Practically without stopping for a breath, I related the day's events, and all he could do was shake his head. He looked back at the boat and shouted to Roy, "I'll be there in a few minutes." "No problem," Roy called back. Carrie handed the catalog back to me, and we walked up to the beach. He had his hands in his pocket and walked looking down. I had my arms folded under my breasts and my head up, waiting for the words to pass between us. "You probably won't come back," he finally said. "You'll probably end up living in California." "That's not true, Carrie. Even if this is my mother and she has a sensible explanation for all this, I'll come back to see you, and someday what?" he said, turning. His eyes were so full of sadness and pain, I could look directly in them, and I gazed out at the ocean. "Someday you and I will have our own home, and you'll design boats, and May will hear, and Laura will come in from the sea, and my father won't die, and my mother will stop crying herself to sleep. Why stop with one pipe dream when there's so many?" he said, and turned away, walking quickly back to the dock. "Carrie!" He kept walking. "Carrie, I swear I'll be back. Carrie!" He turned and looked at me. I ran to him and threw my arms around him. At first he let me dangle there, then he put his arms around my waist and sighed. "Please, just wish me luck," I said. He nodded. "Good luck. I'd come with you if Dad weren't so sick." "I knew you would. I'll call you and write you in." He put his finger on my lips. "No promises." "No promises," I agreed, "except just this one." I kissed him, and then he smiled, and his eyes warmed. "You can believe that, Carrie, Logan, and just throw that skepticism overboard." I left him standing there smiling at me, his shoulders gleaming in the late afternoon sun, the sea roaring behind him, and my heart crying with the terns. Epilogue. I was outside the house waiting when Holly returned, taking one last visual gulp of the house and beach. I got into her car and we puttered away. I didn't look back. "You all right?" she asked. "Yes." "This is for you," she said, reaching beneath her seat and came up with a small bag. Kenneth sent it along. "What is it?" I opened the bag and dipped my fingers to pull out a silver heart locket on a silver chain. "He made it himself years and years ago," she told me. I found the tiny lever and flipped it open and looked at a picture of Mommy when she couldn't have been much older than I was now. The picture on the other side had been removed. I imagined it was a picture of Kenneth. "He told me to tell you he gave that to your mother, and before she left with your stepfather, She gave it back. I think it meant a great deal to him, and it wasn't easy for him to give it away. Yes, I said, nodding and staring at the picture of Mommy. She was, as they say, so photogenic. Maybe if she was suffering from some sort of amnesia, that, Holly said, nodding toward the locket, will help revive her memories. You don't think that just looking at me would? I asked. I don't know. I've heard strange cases where people's face of people they lived with all their lives look at them as strangers. When the mind wants to shut something out, it slams the door shut, and it takes fingers of steel to open it again. She laughed. A friend of mine, she continued, thinks amnesia proves we have other lives. She thinks it occurs when something put us on the border of two existences. Who knows? Yes, I said, as the Cape Cod scenery rushed by. Who knows? I looked out the window at the ocean and the tourists on the beaches. In the distance, I saw the lighthouse. How was Kenneth when you left him? I asked. Back to work, she turned with a soft smile on her face. Did you expect less? If ever he had to escape reality, he has to now, she added. Mommy was always trying to do that, especially when we lived in Sewell. Actually, I shouldn't be surprised by all this, I said, and then sighed. I forgot to call Alice to thank her. You can call her from the motel tonight. I want to share all the expenses, Holly, I insist. No problem. I saw your grandmother give you that pile of loot, she asked. She laughed. Providencetown fell further and further behind us. Mommy had brought me here under false pretenses. Supposedly, we were just visiting Daddy's relatives after his death. She made it seem like the right thing to do, and then she surprised me by telling me the arrangements she had made for me to live here, and then she would send for me. Well, she never did. Or maybe she had. Maybe, ironically, she sent for me through these pictures in the catalog. Perhaps fate had taken control after all, and those stars and the moon that Holly talked about so much had played a role in my destiny. I had been on a mad and desperate search to discover the identity of my father. During the course of that pursuit, I entered Carrie's private world, filled with his sorrows and dreams, and we discovered each other. I would miss our walks on the beach and our talks and laughter and tears. I knew he would spend all of his nights in his attic workshop while I was away. He would mold his dream ships, and he would stop and remember me sitting quietly beside him, watching him work. We were like two people who had been cast overboard by cruel events in their lives. Two people who found each other adrift, and we joined hands to take each other to our own private beach, our paradise. On it we sat and watched the twilight horizon leave us night after night with promises that helped us face each morning. It made us stronger, gave us courage, and filled our hearts with hope. I don't want to say goodbye, Carrie, I thought, but I'm afraid of where this road leads. You were right in saying we should make no promises to each other. Too often promises were made that we could never keep. I came here to unravel lies, to dig away the sand until I reached the hidden truths about ourselves, and often, like the tide, our family pushed the sand back. Here I was on a journey to unravel more, to push away more sand. Why bother? Your eyes asked me, Carrie, why care anymore? The answer is, if I can't find the answer to who I am, then I can't be truthful to you. And Carrie, my darling Carrie, if there's one thing I'll never do is lie to you. Lies are what we have inherited, but it's not the legacy we'll leave our children. That's why I go on, and why I looked toward the road west, and why as we passed the sign that read, "Now leaving Providence Town, Cape Cod," I smiled. I knew I would be back, and when I returned I would be armed with the truth.